Following on from Boat Week last week, in which the government was trying to highlight all that they were doing, and it resulted tragically on Saturday night with these drownings in the Channel. What would Labour do differently to what the current government is doing?
Well, we need to have a fundamental rethink. Don't forget that we were now talking about, because of this memo, about 5 years into the future. If we go 5 years back into the past, there were 430 cross-channel migrants. 430. There's now 46,000 predicted to come this year. This has been a problem that's been growing and growing and growing. And rather than actually looking at the fundamental challenges posed by it and to try and find solutions to those fundamental challenges, this is a government that has constantly gone for headlines rather than solutions. So unless we go for those fundamental solutions, we're not going to solve the problem. So what are they? Let's look at three separate issues. Firstly, people smuggling. The number of convictions of people smugglers has fallen 23%. So why don't we use the money that's being wasted on the Rwanda programme and set up a new task force within the National Crime Agency to go after those people smugglers, convict them and lock them up? When we look at the two other challenges that we face, the factors that are driving migrants from their home countries in the first place. We look at Yemen, we look at Afghanistan, we see conflict and we see political instability. If we need to be working again, because Britain has withdrawn from diplomatically and in terms of engagement and development work from many of these countries, we need to be making sure we can create the circumstances where fewer people feel the need to leave in the first place. And then finally, number three, we've got to start working with our neighbouring countries in a really productive way so that those countries that migrants move through, we are part of the solution to try and make sure that migrants don't keep on that journey, that the problem can be solved before it reaches our shores, and in particular France. OK, well, we'll come back to that. I just want to pick up on your point about, working with these countries like Yemen or Afghanistan or whatever it might be. I mean, how would you propose doing that? Because those sorts of things cost money. Are you talking about raising the foreign aid budget, for example, to try and improve stability in these sorts of countries? Because, of course, that comes at a cost to the taxpayer. It does, but so all of these problems are linked. You have to understand the complexity and just how deep the hole this government have driven us in when it comes to these issues. So let me give you two examples. Firstly, each asylum, the people who are working in the Home Office, working on asylum applications, their productivity has fallen by 50%. Fallen. So they're now they're now actually processing half the number of cases than they were 5 years ago. And then secondly, if we look at the countries that we're working in, we are now, the aid budget has been diverted from in-country to hotels. So from our international aid budget, we are spending £6 million every single day to house asylum seekers within the United Kingdom. That is money we're not spending abroad. So all these problems are linked together. If we can solve the administration problem of asylum seekers, if we can solve the challenge of asylum seekers as they're moving across the European Union and other countries, if we can solve the challenges there, then of course we can use that money we're spending in hotels in the UK and we can use it back there where we did many years ago when the Labour government was running things, using it in country. We now have withdrawn all of our military support for many of these countries. We've withdrawn our development and aid support for many of these countries, and therefore we're paying the price. We're just paying it for in a different place. We're not supporting them in country, we're now supporting them in hotels in our own country. These challenges need solving. They're always better solved at source, otherwise we pay a much bigger, more complicated price for it, as we're seeing today.
I don't want to just stick on one issue in a way, Mr. Kyle, but I'm staggered, frankly, because to say that we solved the migration problem by Yemen, you used as an example, by investing more in a country like Yemen, that is a country with fundamental problems. Are you saying Britain can go into a place like Yemen and we can solve those problems? We can stop people wanting to leave that country? Because that's nonsense, isn't it?
Well, if you look at what we achieved in government before, after the Gleneagles G7 summit, don't forget we in the Labour government chose a G7 summit that we were chairing to solve some of these global problems in the first place. As a result of that, in the years that followed, up until 2010 with the Labour government, 7 of the 15 fastest growing economies in the world were African countries that previously had some of the challenges that we're now talking about. about. Now, I'm not saying you can solve the really difficult issues in Yemen very, very quickly, but are you really suggesting that doing nothing is going to produce a better result than doing something? Now, there will always be issues, particularly where if we look at places like Niger at the moment that has plummeted into armed civil conflict, there will always be driving factors for migration. Well, that's not what I'm saying, that we can solve all of those issues, but let's just look at what we've done. There's been two periods in recent times, a period where we were active in solving some of these challenges in countries and a period where we haven't. Now, look at the issues that have affected us on our shores.
If you forgive me for interrupting, but we're limited on time. I mean, to compare up to 2010, we had the Arab Springs in 2011. We know what the implications were for Libya as well, and how that's been used very much for this influx of migrants. And we've had so many other issues. The rise of climate change. The period before 2010 was a bygone era, and it's really incomparable. And as Stephen says, I do think it's quite a far-fetched suggestion that actually if we as a country could go in and fix all of these problems, people wouldn't be on this kind of global migration that all countries in the world are experiencing at the moment for all of the reasons I've just listed.
So, of course, what I'm not saying, and I'll say it for the second time, is that Britain can solve the world's problems single-handedly. But we are so passive now on the world stage that we're not even trying, and yet we are now suffering a huge situation. Now, also look at what I said earlier. We need to use the money that we're wasting on the Rwanda scheme and start locking up people smugglers, because people smuggling is an industry which has expanded as a result of the increased migration coming across the European Union and European countries and landing on our shores. We're doing nothing. Convictions for people smuggling has fallen 23% in the last few years. 23% has fallen while the problem is getting bigger. So why aren't we targeting on these issues, setting up a new centre within the National Crime Agency tasked with finding, rooting out, prosecuting and locking up people smugglers? Because we're not doing it at the moment. So this is the comprehensive set of measures, because you did ask me at the beginning what a comprehensive solution would look like, and those are all the different things that I've outlined. Now, if we were doing these things, we wouldn't be spending £6 million a day on hotels, we wouldn't need barges, and we could focus on proper solutions rather than headline-grabbing rows, which is what this government is obsessed with. And because they're so focused on headlines, they're not asking the basic questions, such as why aren't ministers asking if there is a barge which is being brought to our country and is so rusty that it needed work done on it to make it safe-worthy to travel across the channel, then is it safe for human habitation? Have the tests been done? Ministers weren't even asking because they were so busy trying to create a row in public that they thought would be politically advantageous for them. If you focus on headlines rather than focusing on solutions, it will always come back to bite you, and that is the story of this government.
I'm sorry that we're squeezed for time, so that the issue you actually wanted to talk about today is squeezed down to a little bit of a headline, I'm afraid. But the Labour Party is promising new expert teachers for secondary schools. How do you fund it? How quickly can you get it online?
Well, I'm always here to answer your questions, as well you know. But with this, what we're finding is that of the 30 subjects being taught in state schools at the moment, 23 of them have in the last year had fewer experts in the classroom teaching them. So 80% of engineering, for example, more than half of computer lessons are being taught by non-experts. So what we want to do is get 6,500 new expert teachers, world-class teachers, into every classroom so that we can get those subjects being taught by experts once again. We're going to pay for this by cancelling the tax status for the tax break that private schools get. So it's a fully funded measure. It will take a while, obviously, but obviously what we're trying to do at the moment as we approach the election is put forward implementable, fully funded, fully costed plans so that we can hit the ground running from a position of government. This is a programme for government. We can't solve every problem overnight, but believe me, we're the party that has the plans and the fully costed plans ready to go for when we have the opportunity, should we have the opportunity next year or whenever the election comes.
Education Secretary on this topic, Gillian Keegan, says just look at Labour's record in Wales. They've seen teacher numbers fall since 2010, whereas Conservative-run England has seen an increase of over 27,000. You can't really argue against that, can you?
Well, what we've seen when Labour is in Westminster government, in Westminster, working in partnership with the devolved authorities, whether they be across England or across the countries of the United Kingdom, you see standards rising and you see waiting lists for other public services like NHS falling. At the moment, we have dysfunction baked in right here at Westminster, and that dysfunction is spreading right across the United Kingdom. Just look at what's happening in Northern Ireland at the moment, where devolved authority has collapsed altogether. Again, because of the dysfunction here in Westminster. So what we need to do is get a partnership between the government here in Westminster across the UK, working with all of the devolved authorities, and when you see that, you see standards rising in schools, attainment rising in schools. But right now we have a problem where we're not even till the end of next year going to see the same per pupil funding in schools that we had when Labour left office in 2010. That's going to be 14 wasted years where teachers have been struggling more and more and more with growing class sizes, a reduction in the number of lessons that are being taught, more than 50% of music, competitive sports, arts and expressive subjects, socially developmental subjects being withdrawn from teaching in state schools. That's why we've seen a doubling in the gap in attainment between the state sector and the private sector, the biggest growth between north and south in attainment, and the biggest growth, most shockingly, between those students who come from affluent backgrounds and those from disadvantaged backgrounds. These inequalities are being baked into the system. We need the plans that's going to start targeting that, and it's got to start with having a great world-class teacher in every classroom.